Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So today I want to talk about a major event that just happened a week ago at the SCO Summit. So the SCO Summit is a summit. It stands for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit that happened in Shenzhen in September in China. So this just recently happened. So this summit here delivered a major geopolitical earthquake, right? And I'm not even sure if Europe is really paying attention to just what just happened here, because this was not just your normal run-of-the-mill summit. This was a major a deal, because you had everybody that came there. You know, you had even NATO countries like Turkey. You had Slovakia. And you know, it's basically was like sending a message, right? So what looked like a simple handshake between Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping was actually Moscow finally locking in its most important energy lifeline. You see, what happened is Russia had built this pipeline. It's called a Siberian 2 pipeline. So initially, Russia had built this pipeline to go to Europe, because what was happening is Russia had a pipeline going through Ukraine and then going to Europe. And, you know, there's been a lot of shenanigans. Ukraine was just, you know, it's still gas, was siphoning off stuff to that pipeline. So Russia was building a second pipeline. There's also Siberian 1, which goes through Turkey, and then it supplies Europe. Like it supplies Hungary and Slovakia and so on. But Russia wanted to make a Siberian 2 pipeline, you know, that bypass everything and goes right to Europe, right? But since the war broke out, Europe said they didn't want it anymore, and they put in sanctions on Russia. So you guys are very familiar with probably what's going on over there right now, right? So now this power deal that Russia just signed. So now this pipeline, which Russia still has there. So they're like, hey, listen, you know what? Europe said they don't want it. We're just going to go ahead and pivot east. We're just going to go to China with it, right? And also, not only just China, India is also firmly in the mix as a key energy partner, okay? Russia has just created a powerful new energy axis that could reshape global gas prices forever. All right. So I don't think you guys understand how big this is. Okay. Because in September 2nd, Putin and Xi signed what Gazprom CEO is called. His name is Alexei Miller, called a legally binding memorandum for this massive power, the massive Power of Siberia project, Siberia 2 project. Okay. This is not just another pipeline. It basically is a game changer. It's a big deal. This is not just like, you know, some, you know, run in the mill, hey, I'm going to send you some gas, and it's not a big deal. No, this is a big deal. This is a big deal. So this is the 2,600 kilometer monster, okay, will pump 50 billion cubic meters of Russian gas per year straight from Siberian Arctic Yamal field through Mongolia and into China. That's roughly a third of what Russia used to send to Europe before the Ukrainian war. So Europe is now saying, hey, no, we don't want Russian gas anymore. We need to punish Russia for this war of aggression against Ukraine. And Russia goes, all right, so you guys don't want to buy my gas. All right, so well, I'm going to go over here because there's plenty of other countries. There's plenty of other people who want to buy it. So I'm just going to go ahead and sell it to them. All right. Now, here's the kicker about all of this. For a very long time, now this pipeline has been around for years. Russia had this project in mind for a very long time, and they kept proposing it to China. Every time they came up to China for it, you know, to propose to China for this gas pipeline deal, China kept saying no. They kept refusing, right? And this happened around like COVID time, 2020. And so China kept, you know, they didn't want to go for it. Why? Because China did not want to depend on Mongolia. China did not want to, have Mongolia as a transit country and having to depend on them. And also, too, China did not want to be so dependent on Russian gas. But I don't know. We're not exactly sure what happened for basically almost 5-6 years. China kept saying no to Russia, and suddenly they're ready to sign. So what is that telling you? It is telling you that there's a geopolitical wind. The political wind has shifted. And you know, we don't have to speculate and guess and think why this is happening. You know, tariffs played a huge role in this, right? Trump's heavy-handedness especially with India and China and Russia. They're like, hey, listen, guys, we need to come together. So China's looking at the landfill and the landscape and goes, hey, listen, you know what? Okay, Russia, we're ready to make this deal. So we'll sign. So China just signed this major deal, major gas deal with Russia. Okay, so what makes this thing really interesting is that India, okay, the role that India is playing at this energy, this new energy axis. Okay, at the SCO summit, we saw something pretty remarkable. So it's not just optics, guys, right? I think I have it here. So these guys, they're just like, they basically having a good old time here with each other, right? Here you have, you see Modi, you see Putin, they just, holding hands like old friends, is having a good old time. All right. This whole thing that you guys see happening here, this is not just for show. Modi and Putin had nearly an hour conversation, an hour long conversation, a private conversation, okay, in a limo where they're talking about energy deals and strategic partnership and so on. All right. And the numbers tell the story. India now buys 1.8 million barrels of energy from Russia. Okay. That always makes up about 30 to 40% of all crude imports. Okay. And, and this is very interesting because, India is a friend of the United States. Normally, India goes with what we say, right? But now they're like, hey, listen, you guys want to put 50% tariffs on us? Well, then, we'll go somewhere else. We'll pivot to China. And mind you, that meeting that you guys just saw on the screen there where Modi was shaking Xi Jinping's hands, Modi has not gone to China for over 7 years because there's been, I did a whole video on this. There's been tension between them, right? They don't really like each other too much. But now, because of tariffs and this geopolitical stuff, everyone's basically fallen into China's web, and is a direct result of our politics and our, and the way we're conducting business and putting sanctions on these countries and behaving like bullies. All right. So check this out. Before this whole war started, okay, India was buying basically nothing. They were not buying any gas or anything like that from Russia. Okay, it was virtually zero. But when the war started, India said, "Hey, listen, we'll take all the oil because Europe stopped buying it." So India's like, "Hey, listen, we'll buy it and we'll sell it to Europe." So which makes perfect sense from an Indian perspective. If you guys gonna be hard-headed and idiots about this, we'll buy the cheap Russian oil. We'll mix it with some of ours. Now you guys can hold the moral ground and say, "Well, I'm not buying Russian oil," but in reality, you are because India is selling it to you. Okay, because India went from zero buying Russian oil in the first 7 months of 2025. India imported $53 billion worth of Russian fuel. And Trump's 50% tariffs on India's goods for buying Russian oil. I mean, they're like, hey, listen, wait a minute. Europe is buying this stuff. You putting 50% tariffs on our goods. So the Indian finance minister basically told Trump, hey, listen, go pound sand. All right, go screw yourself. We'll keep buying this Russian oil because it suits our needs and there's nothing you could do about it. All right. And Europe is like, holy crap, man, we're losing control of this whole thing. All right. The EU has been desperate. They've been trying to find an alternative. Okay. They even announced, hey, listen, we're going to completely phase out buying Russian oil by 2027. Yeah, really? How are you going to do that, Europe? How are you going to manage this? So let's see. So Europe went from importing 45% of Russian gas in 2021. They're down and it went down all the way down to 19%. That's what's on paper. That's what they're telling everybody. Hey, listen, look what we're doing. We're punishing Russia. We were buying 45% of Russian oil, but now we're down to 19%. To 19%, we're not buying Russian yeah, okay. But here's the problem. Russian gas imports into Europe actually went up by 18% in 2024. So it went from 38 billion cubic meters to 45. Where's all this gas coming from, guys? Are you still importing Russian gas? And this is why India is so upset. And this is why the Indian finance minister told, Trump in the Trump administration, the White House, go pound sand, man. Europe is still buying Russian oil. You guys are not sanctioning them. Why are we getting a 50%, tariffs? Okay. So in reality, Europe is still sending billions of dollars to Moscow every year. Okay. Now that Russia has locked in two massive customers, China and India, that can absorb huge volume of gas and oil for decades to come. The Power of Siberia 2 alone could handle 50 billion cubic meters annually. Guys, that's a lot, man. And India is all in the mix of this, too, guys. India is like, hey, listen, you guys don't want this oil. Listen, we'll take it. We'll buy it. Not a problem at all. You know, look at India and China shaking hands. Look at Putin shaking hands with China. China is just this has been a huge, a massive windfall for China. Okay, China. I mean, we've just basically put all these countries right into the arms of China. It's unbelievable. Okay. Because what's going to happen is right now is Russia, this deal is so big. Russia is going to be sending over 100 billion cubic meters of gas to China in the whole entire Eastern Asian region. Okay. Now, here's the thing. The Mongolia here is a little bit of the wild card because they're not just a transit country. They want to actually buy Russian gas too. They're like, hey, listen, man, there's plenty of cheap gas going around. Hey, man, we want some of that too. What about us? Like, we like cheap energy as well. So Mongolia Prime Minister stood up at the Eastern Economic Forum and basically pledged full support for the project, saying that they want to connect major Mongolian cities to the pipeline and use it to solve their winter smog problems in their cities. All right. So, and this is what's so brilliant. This is a very smart politics by Russia. Okay, so instead of just running a pipeline through Mongolia, they're making Mongolia a stakeholder. Okay, that creates another ally in Central Asia and makes the whole project more politically stable. How the hell are we gonna stop this? We don't have like Trump told Zelensky, you don't have the cards. We can't sanction this. We can't stop Russia from doing this. Okay. The implications are massive, guys. This is big because right now Europe is scrambling to replace Russian gas with expensive LNG from the US and Qatar. All right. Nothing beats a pipeline. It's common sense. Russia could just turn on the pipeline, send energy directly from, wherever they're getting it from door to door. There's no transit cost, right? Versus here, you have to get the gas, then you have to liquefy it, put it on a ship, get a crew, get gas, ship it across the Atlantic. You guys get the point, right? That you can't compete with the pipeline. The pipeline will always be cheaper. And Europe just shut itself in the foot by doing all this shit. It's nonsense. It's crazy. Okay. Now, I mean, this whole thing is great for us, it's great for the United States because guess what? This year alone, 60% of our LNG exports is going to Europe. So we just basically cut out the Russians and force Europe to buy our more expensive LNG. Okay. But the thing is, Russia can now sell unlimited amounts of gas and oil to China and India at lower prices. This whole thing here completely changes the global political dynamic. China and India combined represent about 2.8 billion people. Okay. That's a third of the world's population. If they can get cheap Russian gas instead of competing with Europe for expensive LNG, global gas prices will split into two different markets. All right. You're going to have Russia, China, and India on one side, right, getting discounted energy or in the discounted energy zone. And then you're going to have Europe on the other end paying higher prices for premium gas. Okay. So what we witnessed at the SCO summit was not just about energy. It was about creating an alternative world order. Okay. Xi Jinping himself called this an equal and orderly multipolar world and took not so subtle jab at the American hegemony and power politics. Okay. Putin also talked about replacing the outdated Western-centric and Euro-Atlantic models. The visual of Modi, Putin, and Xi together, laughing, holding hands, clearly comfortable with each other, sent a message to Washington and Brussels. The era of Western dominance is over. You guys don't get to tell us what to do anymore. These countries represent 40% of the world's population and some of the fastest growing economies. This is, we should be paying attention to this, guys. This is no longer in a world where America can tell countries what to do and what we say is law. This is no more. I mean, as this war is proven right now, okay? If these countries can coordinate in energy, if they can coordinate on energy, trade, and geopolitics, that's a serious challenge to U.S. global leadership. and these sanctions basically, they're isolationists. We're just closing the door and letting China run the show. Okay, Europe they have a shrinking option. Okay, but these policymakers in Europe, I don't know what the hell they're doing, because this whole thing here should be a wake up call. Russia is not going away. Putin has found new customers who are happy to buy his oil and gas at discounted prices. The sanctions have forced Russia to pivot to Asia, but they haven't collapsed the Russian economy, which was what the Europeans and Americans wanted to do. I mean, you had Joe Biden, the previous administration, went to Europe and says, hey, listen, we're going to punish Russia and we're going to collapse Russia's economy. We're going to make Putin unpopular and we're going to overthrow him. All right. That was the whole goal. This is what we wanted to do. But this whole thing has backfired. Okay. China hit $240 billion in trade with Russia in 2023, and they're targeting another $100 billion. Russia is targeting $100 billion with India by 2030. Meanwhile, Europe is still vulnerable. Countries like Austria get about 98% of the gas from Russia. Hungary and Slovakia want to keep buying cheap gas from Russia. I mean, duh, it makes sense. That's why they're like, listen, we're going to block Zelensky from becoming a part of NATO. We don't want him in NATO. That's not going to happen. And they're a little bit more aligned to Russia because they're getting all the cheap energy, which is benefiting their economy. They're getting it from Russia. Okay. The EU is completely not the EU. These guys are saying, hey, listen, we're going to completely phase out buying Russian oil by 2027. Yeah, good luck with that. But because last year your import from Russia actually went up, so your policy, your plan is nonsensical. It doesn't work. You're going to keep buying Russian oil, but you're going to buy it through a third party, which is still going to be expensive, which is still going to be Russian oil. Okay. So now the European Commission just keep pushing back the deadline on energy, on the cutting off. When is going to be the last day? We're going to stop buying Russian oil this year. Oh yeah, 2027. Let's push it for one more year. Here's more exemptions. Maybe this one here. Yeah, okay. They're just running in circles. They can't do it. Okay. So because they can't do that, it's just that EU officials know that they don't have viable alternatives at reasonable prices. That's just the way it is. Okay. Here's the bottom line, guys. The Power of Siberia 2 deal isn't just about a gas pipeline. It's about the emergence of a new energy axis that could dominate global markets for decades. All right. So it looks like the power is shifting eastwards between Russia, China, and India. Okay. Russia has successfully pivoted from Europe. They say, hey, Europe, you guys want to behave like this? All right, no problem. We'll just focus on Asia. Screw you. They have the growing population, the growing economy anyway. So we'll see you guys later. All right. So everyone's willing to pay for the Russian gas. So from a Russian perspective, this is brilliant politics. And they're going to find new customers to buy this stuff. China gets energy security at lower prices. India gets cheap oil and gas to fuel its growing economy. And all these countries, all three countries get to thumb their nose at the Western sanctions and pressure. Like your sanctions doesn't work. You can't pressure us. That's why Trump kept saying, "Oh yeah, we have new sanction package against Russia. Oh yeah, we're still waiting. When is that going to come?" Because it doesn't matter. No matter how many sanctions you throw at them, it's not going to work. Okay. For Europe, though, the writing is on the wall. The days of cheap Russian energy, that's over. That's done. Now, what the continent need to do, and these European leaders need to do, is to figure out how they're going to compete in a world where their former energy supplier has found new friends with deep pockets and growing appetite. The SCO summit in Shenzhen may have looked like another diplomatic gathering, but it actually marked the beginning of a new chapter in global energy geopolitics, where, basically, they're like, hey, listen, this is the block. We're 40% of the world's population. Europe, you're shrinking. You don't matter anymore. Goodbye. We don't have to listen to you. You could put all the sanctions you want. You can try to come after us as much as you want. You're no longer relevant. So this is very interesting. I'm curious to see where all this thing plays out. That is going to be all for today, guys. Thanks for coming by and listening to this. Let me know what you think. Please leave a comment in the section below. Like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you soon. Thank you.